Imagine the artist mixing pigments under candlelight. What he was about to create would reshape classical art forever. Welcome to Museum Mysteries.
The apparition, also known as l'apparition, is one of the most fascinating and mysterious works by the French artist Gustave Moreau. It was created between the years 1874 and 1876 and presented at the Paris Salon, where it caused astonishment and controversy in equal measure. This piece, a watercolor on paper, measuring approximately 106 by 72 centimeters, captures a moment suspended between the earthly and the supernatural. Princess Salome, surrounded by oriental luxuries, observes the decapitated head of John the Baptist floating before her, wrapped in a luminous halo. The scene, inspired by the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, is transformed by Moreau into a visual poem that transcends the biblical narrative to become a reflection on desire, death, and inner revelation. Moreau, a key figure of French symbolism, does not simply recount the story of Salome. He turns her into an archetype, the femme fatale, beauty as destruction, erotic power as a mystical force. The background, inspired by the Alhambra of Granada and Oriental aesthetics, unfolds a world of columns, mosaics, and veils that envelop the scene in a dreamlike aura. Moreau's technique combines the precision of detail with a use of light that transforms colors into vibrating jewels. His work reveals influences from Japanese art and Renaissance sculptures such as Cellini's Medusa. Every element is charged with symbolism. The veil suggests both purity and temptation, the jewels evoke the sacred and the profane, and the radiant head of John the Baptist embodies divine justice and the weight of human desire. When it was first exhibited, the apparition provoked scandal. The Parisian public was disturbed by the union of the biblical and the erotic, the mystical and the sensual. Some critics accused Moreau of profaning a sacred theme, while others hinted that the painting was the product of hallucination or the effects of opium. Yet that mixture of fascination and rejection cemented his fame. The figure of Salome became a cultural symbol of the late 19th century, an embodiment of female danger, of desire-defying morality, and of the power of the gaze. Writers and artists such as Huysmans and Oscar Wilde were inspired by this painting. Wilde himself, after seeing it in the Louvre, wrote his celebrated play Salome in 1893, perpetuating the connection between art, eroticism, and mysticism. Time has not diminished the magnetism of the work. Although there are no public records of major restorations, its preservation in the Musée d'Orsay maintains its spectral luminosity. Over the years, the painting has been the object of many interpretations. Some see it as a critique of the moral repression of its era, others as a meditation on the duality of the human soul. The truth is that Moreau succeeded in condensing in a single image the eternal conflict between the sacred and the profane, between flesh and spirit. To contemplate the apparition is to enter a dream, frozen in time. The posture of Salome, her arm extended pointing to the luminous head, makes her a mediator between two worlds. The figures in the background remain motionless, as if the vision belonged only to her, suggesting that the miracle or the horror happens within her mind. The scene does not seek narration but introspection. It is an inner vision, a delirium of beauty and punishment. Moreau makes the viewer feel both fascinated and uneasy. The image vibrates between devotion and sin, between ecstasy and fear. Today, the apparition remains one of the most studied and admired works of symbolism. Its power lies in its ambiguity. We do not know if the head truly floats in the air or in Salome's consciousness. We do not know if beauty is redemption or condemnation. Its golden glow, its gems and veils, its atmosphere of sacred nightmare continue to hypnotize the modern observer, reminding us that the deepest art does not seek to give answers, but to awaken questions. In this painting, Moreau does not portray a biblical story. He portrays the human soul facing its own luminous and terrible reflection. That is precisely the force that makes the apparition an immortal work. It speaks not only of Salome, or of John the Baptist, or of Herod, but of the human condition in its purest state, fascination with the forbidden, attraction to death, desire for the impossible. In every stroke, Moreau seems to say that the soul is condemned to struggle between purity and corruption, between faith and desire. Salome is not merely a seductive woman, she is the metaphor of the human mind confronting what transcends it. The prophet's head floating before her could be the mirror of her own conscience, the symbol of the price we pay for looking too deeply into what we were forbidden to see. The artist does not paint a religious scene, he paints an inner ritual. That introspective dimension was what attracted the thinkers and artists of the fin de siècle. In a time when reason began to crack under the pressure of the unconscious, the apparition offered a vision ahead of its time, desire as a sacred and destructive force at once. Oscar Wilde saw in this painting the seed of an idea that would haunt him throughout his life, the union of beauty and fatality. For Wilde, Salome was not evil but divine in her desire. She represented the indomitable energy of the human soul when it ceases to obey rules. Thus his play, inspired by Moreau, is not a mere recreation of the gospel but a spiritual tragedy. The same was thought by the symbolists and decadents, who saw in Moreau a mystic of color, a painter who did not copy reality but transformed it into vision. Every part of the apparition is constructed as a symbol in itself. The blood flowing from the Baptist's neck gleams like rubies. The walls are covered with impossible arabesques that seem to breathe, and the halo's light bathes Salome in an almost celestial clarity. Everything appears suspended in an atmosphere that does not belong to the real world. It is as if the scene floated in a parallel dimension where the sacred and the sensual merge. That confusion is the key to the work. There is no separation between sin and devotion, between body and spirit, between guilt and desire. Moreau understood that the divine is not in purity but in contradiction, in the struggle of opposites that inhabits the human soul. The artist worked obsessively on this theme in multiple versions. There exist preparatory studies, drawings, sketches, and even an oil version also kept in the Musée Gustave Moreau, showing his search for balance between visual splendor and mystical intensity. It is said that he spent hours illuminating the jewels or fabrics with the finest brushes, as if in every reflection of light he sought to enclose a revelation. That obsession earned him the nickname the goldsmith of painting, because he did not paint figures but jewels, dreams, apparitions. Moreau was not a realist, he was a visionary trying to turn painting into a spiritual language. The scandal provoked by his work was not only due to its eroticism, but also to its incomprehension. In an era dominated by academicism and historical scenes, Moreau broke with everything. He did not depict heroes, wars, or battles. He painted souls. Critics of the time did not know how to classify him. He was not a romantic, not a classicist, not an impressionist. His language was different, closer to the dreams and mystical visions of the Middle Ages. Many considered him eccentric, a painter of delusions. Yet that apparent madness was the seed of a new visual language that would later influence Odilon Redon, Gustav Klimt, and the Surrealists. At its core, the apparition is a meditation on the act of looking. Salome does not touch the head, does not cry, does not scream. She simply observes. Her gesture is one of wonder, not horror. That calm before the terrible is what unsettles the viewer. What does she truly feel? Remorse, fascination, guilt, pleasure. Moreau leaves the mystery open. In that frozen instant, the artist reveals the power of contemplation. To look can be as violent as to kill. What destroys Salome is not her dance, but her gaze. That idea has resonated through generations, influencing psychoanalysts, writers, and philosophers who saw in the painting an allegory of the unconscious, where repressed desires take form and become visible. Over time, the interpretation of the work has evolved. In the 19th century, it was seen as a portrait of the femme fatale, an archetype of male fear toward the independent, seductive woman. In the 20th century, it was reinterpreted as a figure of female power and autonomy, a woman who assumes her desire without fear of consequences. Today, in the 21st century, the apparition can be read as a metaphor for the human mind facing its shadows, an invitation to look directly at what we fear. In a world dominated by fleeting images, This painting reminds us that the most powerful visions are not outside but within us. The most enigmatic aspect is that no one knows whether the head truly exists. The light that surrounds it seems otherworldly, and no other figure appears to see it. Neither Herod nor Herodias, nor the servants react. That indifference suggests that the vision belongs only to Salome, that she is alone before the revelation. It is possible that what she contemplates is not the prophet's head but her own condemnation. Perhaps the apparition is her punishment, her inner mirror. The horror floating before her is nothing but the weight of her fulfilled desire. In that ambiguity lies Moreau's genius. Everything may be real or imaginary, physical or spiritual, and the boundary between both worlds dissolves before our eyes. The golden glow dominating the scene is not merely decorative. In the symbolism of the time, gold represented divine wisdom, but also the soul's corruption through excess of power and beauty. The artist plays with that duality, turning light into an ambiguous element. What illuminates also burns, what reveals also condemns. Every centimeter of the painting vibrates with that tension between the divine and the carnal. In fact, recent studies have revealed that Moreau applied up to a dozen translucent layers of pigment to achieve that effect of inner luminosity, as if the painting breathed from within. Today, the apparition is studied not only as a masterpiece of symbolism, but also as a precursor of modern psychological art. Its elements anticipate what Freud would later explore in the unconscious mind: dreams, visions, repression. Moreau painted decades before psychology began to theorize about these things. Thus, his Salome does not belong to the past, but to the eternal present of the soul. In her face, there is no evil, but revelation. In her gesture, no pride, but understanding. She beholds the naked truth and cannot look away, because in that instant she understands that desire and guilt are inseparable, that beauty and death share the same radiance. That radiance, almost unbearable, is what makes the apparition transcend painting and enter the realm of myth. Every detail breathes symbolism beyond the visible. Gold, blood, silence, and gaze form a secret language the viewer must decipher slowly. Moreau knew that an image could contain more truths than a discourse. Therefore, he explains nothing, only suggests. In his pictorial universe, things are never what they appear to be. Beauty hides guilt, purity conceals temptation, and the sacred is tinged with desire. Thus, the painting becomes a veiled revelation, a kind of visual prophecy where the human soul faces its double, the light it longs for, and the darkness it fears. Whoever observes this work for a few minutes feels something begin to move within it. The halo around John the Baptist's head throbs like a luminous wound, and Salome's gaze seems to pierce the canvas. It is as if the painting contained an inner vibration, a spiritual breath. It is no wonder that many visitors to the Musée d'Orsay confess to feeling disturbed before it, as if the painting were looking back at them. That sensation of being observed by the work is part of Moreau's spell. He manages to invert the roles between spectator and art, making the viewer part of the mystery. This power of the visual, this ability to provoke a nearly mystical experience, is one reason why the apparition has been compared to Byzantine icons or to the ecstatic visions of medieval mystics. Moreau himself spoke of his art as a form of prayer. He said the painter must be a priest of the image, someone capable of revealing the invisible. In his studio, surrounded by more than 8,000 sketches and ancient objects, he spent hours silently observing natural light on golden surfaces. He did not paint to please the public, but to seek an inner truth. In a letter to a friend, he once wrote that every line must contain a tremor of the soul. That spiritual quest is what sets his work apart from that of other artists of his time. While many explored color or light from a technical point of view, Moreau did so as if each brushstroke were a prayer. The apparition is not a mere aesthetic exercise. It is an attempt to approach the divine through form and color. That sacred dimension of Moreau's art is also reflected in his obsession with symbols. The pavement beneath Salome's feet, with its geometric patterns, can be interpreted as a reference to the Temple of Jerusalem, symbol of hidden knowledge. The jewels adorning her body are not mere ornaments, they represent the duality between the corruptible body and the eternal soul. The Baptist's halo, composed of an almost metallic radiance, recalls the fire of the Holy Spirit, yet also evokes judgment. Everything in the composition is carefully designed to maintain the tension between salvation and damnation, between the human and the transcendent. Moreau, like an alchemist, transforms matter into symbol and painting into a mirror of consciousness. Over time, this work became one of the most reproduced and studied of the 19th century. Symbolist writers saw it as the perfect synthesis between art and poetry. Joris Karl Huysmans, in his novel A Reborn, describes how his protagonist contemplates a reproduction of the apparition and becomes fascinated by Salome's morbid beauty. That literary description helped consolidate the legend of the painting as an icon of decadentism. Since then, the figure of Salome became a cultural symbol, muse of poets, musicians, sculptors. Richard Strauss composed his opera Salome inspired by Wilde's play, and its original stage designs used visual motifs taken from Moreau. Thus, the painting transcended its original medium to become a modern myth. However, the passage of time also transformed how it is perceived. What was considered scandalous in the 19th century is now seen as an affirmation of creative freedom. The union of eroticism and spirituality that so disturbed critics of its day is now interpreted as an honest exploration of human nature. In that fusion lies its greatness. Moreau does not judge, he does not moralize. He simply exposes the mystery of desire and faith as two sides of the same coin. And in doing so, he confronts us with our own duality, that constant tension between what we long for and what we fear. From a technical standpoint, the apparition is a masterpiece of watercolor. Moreau uses superimposed transparencies to achieve a depth impossible with traditional pigments. The result is a surface that seems to radiate its own light. That inner luminosity is the perfect metaphor for the painting's spiritual content. The divine does not come from outside, but from within. The painting does not shine because it reflects light, but because it contains it. Each layer of color, each golden line, is designed to vibrate in harmony with the viewer's emotions. It is an art that does not impose by force but hypnotizes slowly, enveloping the gaze until it is lost within the radiance. Many scholars have noted that Moreau was ahead of his time. His treatment of symbols and his language of visions would influence, decades later, movements such as Surrealism. André Breton, founder of that movement, mentioned Moreau as one of the precursors of the exploration of the unconscious in art. And it is no coincidence, what Moreau achieved with his brushes was to open the door to dreams. The apparition does not belong to the external world, but to that space where imagination and desire intertwine, a territory that Freud and Jung would only begin to chart years later. But there is something even deeper: silence. Amid so much brilliance, ornamentation, and gold, the scene is absolutely mute. There are no cries, no music, no noise, only a dense, almost spiritual silence. That silence is the true protagonist of the painting. It is the space where revelation occurs. Moreau knew that the divine does not manifest in noise, but in the stillness of the soul. That is why when we contemplate the apparition, we feel a kind of inner pause, a moment when everything stops. It is a silence that does not frighten, but invites introspection. The effect it produces cannot be explained in words, it must be felt. Some describe it as a mixture of attraction and fear, others as a mystical experience. What is certain is that the apparition achieves something few works do. It transcends time and speaks directly to the soul of the viewer. The story of Salome and John the Baptist may belong to the past, but the conflict it embodies is eternal. All of us, at some point, have been Salome facing the consequence of our own desires. All of us have seen floating before us the head of something we loved and destroyed at the same time. That universality is what makes this painting a mirror of humanity. The apparition needs no explanation, because it is itself a question. What happens when beauty becomes punishment? What is the price of desire? Where does faith end and guilt begin? In that impossible balance between light and shadow, Moreau shows us that the soul does not seek answers but revelations. That is why every time someone stands before this painting, its mystery is reborn. No matter how many centuries pass, the head will keep floating, Salome will keep gazing, and the viewer will keep wondering what lies behind that golden glow that seems to come from the very depths of eternity.